Joining us from Cedar Rapids, Iowa is Republican presidential candidate Dr. Ben Carson and the author of A More Perfect Union. Thank you very much for being with us.
Good to be with you.
Dr. Carson, why do you want to be president?
Well, it wasn't something that was on my bucket list, quite frankly, but after the prayer breakfast in 2013, there were so many people clamoring for me to do it, and I just figured if I ignored them, it would all die down, but it didn't. It kept building, in fact, and the draft movement started, and then every place I went, there were people out with signs, "Run, Ben, run." I started getting petitions, 5,000 every week, until I had hundreds of thousands of them, clogging up everything. And I finally said, maybe I better listen to what these people are saying. And I was really struck particularly by the elderly people who were saying that they had given up and were just waiting to die, given up on the American dream. And so many younger people who were concerned about their children. And I began thinking, after spending my entire life looking out for the welfare of children, how can I now go and put my feet up and relax? And even though I knew that all the pundits said it was impossible, I said, Lord, if you really want me to do it, you'll have to open the doors. I'm not going to kick them down. And formation of a tremendous national team, money coming in like crazy. Next week we will hit our 1 millionth donation. So I see it as something that needs to be done. And my fellow Americans were asking me to do it, and I will continue to walk through the doors as long as they're open.
You say that the nation is in a shambles, and you also quote in your book, Thomas Paine, "These are the times that try men's souls." What are the country's biggest challenges?
Well, I think there are a number. First of all, we're severely divided. And a wise man once said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. Never has stood, never will stand." We have a war on virtually everything. War on women, race wars, income wars, age wars, religious wars. And obviously, this is not working for us. Our strength lies in our unity. And we are fundamentally being changed into something else. We also have severe fiscal problems. There was a time when we made every effort to keep the books balanced. Thomas Jefferson said it's immoral to pass debt on to the next generation. And yet, if we could fast forward him to today, I'm sure he would just stroke out if he saw what we were doing. $18.5 trillion national debt. To pay that back, it would take you 5,000 years at a rate of $10 million a day, 365 days a year. And that's what's being put on the backs of our children. And it's much worse than that, actually, because when you look at the fiscal gap, which is the amount of unfunded liabilities, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all the governmental programs, the governmental agencies, versus what we expect to bring in through taxes and other revenue sources, which we're not developing well, by the way, those numbers should be identical or close to identical if we're fiscally responsible. If we're not, there's a gap that develops. Bring that forward to today's dollars. It's known as the fiscal gap. It sits at over $200 trillion. And the only reason we can sustain that is because we can print money, which we're doing inappropriately. We can't sustain that. And we may not always be the reserve currency of the world who can print money. There are several nations that are protesting about us simply because we appear to be so fiscally irresponsible. Later on this month, the IMF will be looking at China in terms of their application to become a reserve currency. That could shake things up a fair amount. So the point is we need to get our house in order from that standpoint. And then we also need to be looking at those things that threaten us into the future, not just reacting when a problem occurs. For instance, our grid, our electric grid, it needs to be hardened, and it needs to be done post-haste because an electromagnetic pulse from the sun averages about once every 150 years. The last one was 155 years ago. That could knock us back decades. Not to mention, a rogue nation who exploded a nuclear weapon in our exo-atmosphere in the right location could have an electromagnetic pulse also. And then if you coordinated that with the cyber attack and dirty bombs it could be a disastrous scene. We need to be planning for these things. We're not proactive anymore. Same thing with our energy resources. If we were proactive, we could use those on the geopolitical scene in a very effective way to help contain Putin and really to change a lot of the economic vectors in our world, which were established on oil from the Middle East. We don't really need oil from the Middle East anymore, and we really need to relook at some of those things.
Let me go back to the issue of the debt. As you said, $18 trillion and growing. And as you point out on your website, it's the third largest item in terms of federal expenditures. In order to cut the debt, are you willing to cut entitlement programs? Medicare, Medicaid, deal with Social Security. That accounts for a bulk of what we're spending right now in the federal government.
I actually don't think that that is the first thing that you need to do. I think you need to fix the economy first. And how would you fix the economy? Well, you need to create an atmosphere that encourages entrepreneurial risk-taking and capital investment and innovation. The regulatory gallop that is going on now, it used to be regulatory creep, now it's a gallop, is having a profound effect on our economy. And people say, well, how does that affect the economy? Every single regulation costs money in terms of goods and services. That gets passed on to the consumer. Doesn't hurt a rich person when they walk into the store and buy a box of laundry detergent and it's gone up 15 cents. But the poor person notices that right away. And the middle class person may not notice it with that one box of soap. But when they get to the cash register, they notice it because everything's up 5 cents, 10 cents, or 15 cents because of regulations. It impacts the ability of average Americans to experience the American dream. Also, by having very, very high debts, the Fed is not really able to raise the interest rates where they need to be. You hear for every quarter, we're going to try to raise the interest rates, and then they back down. Why? Because the debt service on $18 trillion already is $250 billion a year. If we let the interest rates rise to a normal level, we'll be talking $1 trillion. And we simply don't have $1 trillion as our debt accumulates. So what we have to start concentrating on is how to drive that down. And by the way, what does that do to the economy? What does it do to the small banks? It's driving them out of business. And they don't have any incentive to make a loan to the average guy so he can start a business. So the big banks can benefit. The big corporations can benefit from those low interest rates because they can borrow and then buy back their stock and increase their value. But what about the average American? That's what our backbone is. And that's what took us to the pinnacle of the world so quickly. And we have to really begin to understand, the complexity of the economy. It's not a simple thing. So if we fix the regulatory problem and we fix the tax structure so that we incentivize people rather than disincentivize them, then we will have a tremendous boom that will occur. And jobs will become available at that point. And it is at that point that you then address the entitlement situation. And at that point, it does not seem cruel and unusual to do so.
Dr. Carson, earlier you mentioned Vladimir Putin, and this morning on ABC you said your experience as a surgeon dealing with 2 a.m. life and death decisions make you prepared for what the military would involve. But is that a fair comparison? Do you think you being a surgeon also prepares you for the life and death decisions that you would need to make as commander-in-chief?
It's not so much being a surgeon as it is having lots of experience making critical decisions that do involve life and death. There aren't a whole lot of other areas where that happens, but I believe that life experiences count, and that this country was actually designed for citizen statesmen in the leadership role, not for career politicians. But the career politicians have managed to convince everybody that they're the only ones who can solve the problems. And yet, when you look at our Congress, there's 8,700 years of political experience there, and that really doesn't seem to be the solution.
Do you think you personally are prepared to be commander-in-chief?
I do believe I have the ability to do that. Certainly, as I look back over past commanders-in-chiefs. But also, one of the things that I learned as a surgeon, particularly doing very, very complex procedures, is that you don't do it all by yourself. Even though you have a great deal of knowledge, maybe even a great deal of experience, but new and different types of situations come up. You have to be willing to be on a continual learning curve, because the world changes every single day, and it's changing at a very rapid pace. You have to be able to keep up with it. You have to be able to surround yourselves with people who are very, very fluent in the things that are going on, and you have to be wise.
Jonathan Pollitt, as you know, was released after spending 30 years in a federal prison, and some say that he should be allowed to go back to Israel. Do you have a view on that?
I really would have to have all the details of the information that he gave to Israel and whether he still represents a danger with more information that he has. If after doing that analysis it does not appear that he can do more damage, then I certainly wouldn't have any problem with it.
I'm not sure if you saw the story from Politico, but Bob Vanderplatz, who is a social conservative and headed up a major family event in Iowa, saying that many people are concerned about your foreign policy credentials, and that's one of the reasons why your poll numbers have dropped in Iowa. Do you want to address that?
Well, I would simply say they should actually listen to what I'm saying. I was one of the very first individuals to talk about the need to take the land, or the caliphate, from ISIS in order to make them look like losers, to deprive them from the revenue that they get from their oil, and how we need to fight the battle over there and really take it to them so that it won't wind up coming to us. Talking about how we need to increase our own vigilance, and particularly in terms of the FBI, TSA, and teaching our own citizens about how to react in case of a terrorist attack. These are all things that we need to be doing big time. We need to be affecting the world monetary markets so that they're not able to move money around. It has to be done at a very significant level, and it needs to be done quickly.
On all of these issues, whether it's foreign policy or as we saw 7 years ago with the financial meltdown on Wall Street and the economic impact it had on the U.S., who would you surround yourself with? What type of individual, and if you want to name names, feel free to do so, that you would surround yourself with in the Oval Office?
Well, you know, I would have a combination of people with real-world experience in economics, as well as some of the academics who talk about the theory. Neither one of them is always 100% right, but when you listen to the combinations, I think that works. The same thing with military strategy. I think you want to have people with real practical experience. And then there are a number of what I call military philosophers. You know, they teach these highfalutin courses. You know, sometimes they have good things to say. And sometimes the two gel, and sometimes they're moving in opposite directions. But I think you need to hear from all sides of an issue. And I think the other thing that is absolutely critical for a leader, and particularly a commander-in-chief, you need to go down a whole list of scenarios. And you need to put together the protocols for dealing with those things so that they're already ready to go when it happens. And obviously those need to be updated you know, every so often to make sure that you're not outdated. But there's no reason that you should get into a 9/11 type situation and have to start at square one.
But don't you think if you're going to be the chief executive, as many people have said, if you want a brain surgeon, you want the very best, and you've been an outstanding surgeon, that in the White House you'd want somebody who's had some experience in these areas?
Well, when you look at the job of president and you look at all the people who are running, I'm not sure that any of them have had experience in that area, except with the possible exception of Hillary Clinton. And when you look at what that experience has led to, in her case, it does not bode well for experience. But I think what is really needed is wisdom, and the ability to work with other people, and the ability to be flexible, and the ability to continue to learn.
Let me get your reaction to Donald Trump on the campaign trail this past week. Here's what he said about you.
You know, all the polls say I'd be the best at the military, I'd be the best at foreign policy, which is interesting. Because if you read the front page of the New York Times today, they said about Ben Carson that he's unable to understand foreign policy. You notice people actually said this, that he is unable to comprehend or understand foreign policy. It was a devastating story. It's all over the place. And if you watched over the weekend, you would understand exactly what they're talking about, because it was devastating when you watched the interview. But he's unable to comprehend foreign policy. We can't do this. I think he's a nice guy, probably. Who knows? I don't care. I don't care. We need somebody that's sharp and tough and smart and can figure it out fast.
That was Donald Trump last week in Massachusetts. Dr. Ben Carson, who's joining us from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Your response?
My response is, of course, you know, he is obviously very worried about me and concentrates a lot on trying to denigrate me. You know, some people will try to win at all costs. That's what they want to do. I'm not one of those people. I'm going to always stick to my values and principles and talk about the things that are really important. Trying to tear someone else down just is not, I think, part of the character for me.
You've been critical of the media, writing about some of the accounts that you wrote about in your other best-selling book, Gifted Hands. Is there anything in that book that is in any way inaccurate?
You know, there may be some dates that are inaccurate, but none of the stories themselves are inaccurate. And I find it rather amusing that, you know, as these accusations occur and then as they're debunked, you don't hear anything about the debunking. And I believe that that's why it's done, to raise doubt, to raise suspicion. They don't really care about the veracity or how carefully the research was done. You know, case in point, you know, when they were talking about, you know, my temper, and they talked to people who I knew largely after that problem was resolved. And because they didn't witness it, supposedly it didn't happen. You know, this is not what I would call stellar journalism.
How did you resolve that issue for you personally?
Well, for me, it was personally resolved on the day of the attempted stabbing, when I realized that I was completely out of control. And I just locked myself in the bathroom and contemplated my life, realized I would never be successful with a temper like that. And I prayed for deliverance. I picked up the Bible, turned it to the book of Proverbs. There were all these verses in there about anger, including Proverbs 16:32 that says, "Mightier is the person who can control their temper than the person who can conquer a city." And it spoke deeply to me, and I came to an understanding that to react, to punch someone in the face, was not a sign of strength. It was a sign of weakness. It meant you could be easily manipulated by people or by circumstances. And I also came to understand that it's a sign of selfishness. It's always about me, my, and I. Somebody did this to me, they took my thing, I want this, they're in my space. And if you learn how to step outside of the center of the circle, let it be about someone else, the likelihood of you becoming upset and angry is very limited.
Who has had the biggest influence on your life?
I would say that would be my mother, because she absolutely refused to be a victim. She didn't make excuses, and she wouldn't accept excuses from us, even though she had a most horrendous life herself.
In your book, A More Perfect Union, you also talk about the press, and you say that you believe that the press is protected by, in part because it was assumed that they would be honest on the side of the people and without an agenda. So what does that tell you about the state of the media today?
Well, obviously, they've migrated pretty significantly away from that goal. But I think there's still hope for them. I think, you know, there are some young journalists who probably are beginning to understand the deleterious effect of the bias and of the agenda-driven media, and will recognize that they can have an ameliorating effect on our society by being honest and equipping the people with objective information.
Let me ask you about two other issues that you feature on your website. First of all, the Second Amendment. As a supporter of the NRA, are there any circumstances that you would want to restrict at least these clips or magazines or other assault-style style weapons that are designed to kill a lot of people?
Well, I certainly wouldn't want them in the hands of someone who is mentally unstable and has had that documented. I think that would be a huge mistake.
And with regard to health care, you're calling it a looming disaster. What changes would you make?
Well, first of all, I want to put the decision-making back in the hands of patients and healthcare providers and move the bureaucracy out of it. We spend plenty of money on healthcare, twice as much per capita as many other nations, and yet we have horrendous access. And it's because we built it into a giant bureaucracy and built it on a political platform. Medicine and healthcare should not be an integral part of a political platform. And that's what I would work on by using health savings accounts, giving you flexibility within them to shift money around within a family so that you can cover almost anything. That, of course, drives down the cost of the catastrophic insurance tremendously because virtually nothing's coming out of that insurance except real catastrophic issues.
As all of these issues come through you, if you are President Carson, how would you structure the decision-making process in your White House on both foreign and domestic issues?
Well, I think you have to have a decision chart. Obviously, the president cannot be involved in every detail that's going on. That's something, that I learned, in building pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins and in building the Carson Scholars Fund into a national organization. But as long as you have a reporting structure that allows people the opportunity to voice their concerns, to provide their suggestions, you're much more likely to have something that runs efficiently.
And of course, with all of these issues, you need to work with Congress, and you draw an analogy between playing pool and following the congressional rules. So can you elaborate?
Well, you obviously need somebody who is willing to sit down and talk. This is something that we're not seeing with the current administration, even with the Democrats. And recognize that the Congress, in a republic-type government, is the voice of the people. They've been almost disenfranchised, partly on their own accord because they're not very courageous. But as a result of that, the executive branch and the judicial branch have overstepped their bounds. And that's why we have a system of checks and balances. And as the chief executive, I would sit down with Congress and make sure that they understood that, and understood also that I would reverse the trend that has been going on for several presidents now of using executive orders in an inappropriate way. They're specifically stated why and when they should be used, but they've been abused by both sides.
And from the book, you talk a lot about our founding fathers. Do you have one that impressed you the most?
Boy, I'm impressed by a lot of them, but I'm particularly impressed with Thomas Jefferson, who seemed to have very deep insight into the way that people would react, and tried to craft our Constitution in a way that it would control people's natural tendencies and control the natural growth of the government. But he said that a time would come when the people would become less vigilant. And as a result of that, the government would grow, would infiltrate, and would begin to dominate. But just before we turned to some other form of government, he said the people would awaken and recognize what was going on and rise up and retake control. I'm very hopeful that that's what's about to happen.
And Dr. Carson, finally, what has this process been like for you running for president? What has surprised you the most? What have you learned about yourself?
Well, one of the things I learned about myself is that it doesn't bother me when people attack me. I thought that I would be really bothered by that in the beginning. But now I've come to understand that they're just trying to protect their turf, they're trying to protect their ideology, and they will go through any length in order to do that. But the thing that has surprised me most is the rapidity with which the people are awakening, and the large numbers of people who've never been involved in the process who are coming into the process. And I think that's surprised a lot of the the pundits also. The fact that next week we will have our 1 millionth donation. No one could ever have foreseen that our campaign would be powered by the people and not by the special interests.
And that process includes debates. Have you enjoyed them thus far?
The last one was pretty reasonable. The couple before that, not so much.
And what's next for you in terms of this campaign? Are you in for the long haul, even if you have some setbacks in the early primaries and caucus states?
I will continue as long as I feel that I have the support of the people. I mean, because this is not about me. This is about America. And this is about the people. And if it ever becomes about anything else, then it would not be appropriate.
Have you even begun thinking about a running mate down the road?
I have. You know, I would obviously be looking for somebody who has a very similar philosophy. I know that traditionally people look for somebody who can bring strength to the ticket, who might be able to bring another region of the country. But I think it's much more important to have someone who's aligned with you, because that person could then become a very important part of the administration, as opposed to what usually goes on.
Dr. Ben Carson, Republican presidential candidate, joining us from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate it.
A pleasure. Thank you.
National security was a major topic on the Sunday morning talk shows, with the Syrian refugee crisis and the ISIS threat dominating much of the conversation.